Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Patricia Falchetti here from Social Living Solutions. I'm coming on this afternoon to talk about ADHD and sleep issues and all of the different sleep issues that are associated with it. I've come on here a little bit later this afternoon than I planned to because there's so much interesting information out there and so much research, and I wanted to cover as much as I could in this live today because this is a real issue for children with ADHD and adults with ADHD. And I wanted to come on here and give you as much information as I can. So before I start, I'll let you know that I have got behind my screen here, my phone screen, information. And those of you that have been watching my lives for a while will know that I often look up and down because I'm trying to just make sure I give you all of the information that I've researched. And if you have any questions or any comments, if you're watching as I go, please do comment and put questions in as I go. And I certainly will try and answer them as I go. And if not, I will always research and come back to you. And the other thing is that if you are watching on replay, to please put hashtag replay in the comments if you're watching afterwards, just so that I know that that you've watched, that you've seen it, and also to, again, if you've any questions, to pop them in with the replay. So ADHD and sleep, a massive issue. So research shows that between 25 to 50% of ADHDers have clinically reported sleep difficulties. This can be attributed to a number of factors: biology, side effects from medications, an inconsistent bedtime routine, and characteristics related to ADHD itself. People with ADHD often have a hard time falling asleep at night, and if they are able to fall asleep, they often have great difficulty staying asleep. We all know that ADHD can make it more difficult, harder to calm the mind and body, and this, of course, turns into, goes into the nighttime when we're trying to calm our mind and body to go to sleep. And while reasons are not yet known, the majority of adults with ADHD, as I mentioned before, report sleep difficulties. Sleep issues differ depending on the type of ADHD one has, and ADHDs experience both poor sleep quality and also to difficulty going to bed at an earlier time. Now, I'm just going to go into some really interesting facts that I've just come across lately that I really would like to share with you. And this is around this is in relation to the association with ADHD and other sleep disorders. And I think this is particularly important for parents that might be watching this live or this live afterwards, because this is really critical for our kids, but also for ourselves as adults too, because it might then cause you after you've watched this to further investigate and to look into what's going on, and not just think it's because of bad routines or because you have ADHD, but that there are sleep disorders, which research is finding more and more is associated with ADHD. So, as I said, researchers are examining the associations between ADHD and the following sleep issues. So there's one called sleep disordered breathing, which is SPD. The other one is obstructive sleep apnea, which is OSA. Restless leg syndrome, which is RLS. Circadian rhythm sleep disorders, so CRSDS. Insomnia, and narcolepsy. Now, it's important with this information to figure out what sort of sleep disorder it is, as they all have different solutions and strategies. Sleep disordered breathing is characterized by abnormal patterns of respiration or sleep ventilation during sleep. And particularly if you have little ones, you might notice this, particularly if they sleep with you from time to time, or even when you're going in at night and checking on them. Obstructive sleep apnea, OSA, is characterized by partial or complete upper airway obstructions, leading to disrupted sleep. So a history of snoring or possible obstructive sleep apnea during childhood is associated, with a twofold difference in the odds of ADHD diagnosis and symptoms. An elevated incidence of sleep-disordered breathing is found among individuals with ADHD. So is sleep-disordered breathing and obstructive sleep apnea. Now, what these conditions can do is they can create reduced oxygen incidence in the brain, which could lead to brain stress inflammation. So there actually is a condition or symptoms of brain stress inflammation or triggered alerts disruptions to sleep. This can alter the neurochemical substrates of the prefrontal cortex, leading to neurobehavioral deficits, which underlie ADHD symptoms. So what I'm saying in short is that these sleep issues, they affect the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and then they can lead to neurobehavioral deficits, which then underlie, we know neurobehavioral deficits are what underlie or are underpinning ADHD symptoms. SBD, which is the sleep disordered breathing, affects psychological outcomes through various mechanisms, including the deleterious effects of hypoxic insults and the resulting stress and inflammation in the brain, and or repeated arousal or sleep-based disruptions. It can alter the neurochemical, as I said before, of the prefrontal cortex, leading to those neurobehavioral deficits that we so often see in ADHD and that so many of us suffer with from ADHD and trying to manage daily. The first guiding principle is that all children initially presenting with symptoms of ADHD should be routinely screened of primary or comorbid sleep disorders such as those I've just mentioned. And I think that this is, hey Sharon, oh, glad to see that you're watching. So this is really, really interesting, this thing, this information, because what it's made me think is that when our children do get ADHD diagnoses, we should be looking now and thinking about them being screened either for primary or comorbid sleep disorders. We already know, as those of you that do watch my lives and also know the work that I do, that with both ADHD and autism, so neurodiversity, there often are comorbid conditions, such as anxiety, depression, OCD, ODD that sit with those. So this doesn't surprise me that we could also have comorbid sleeping disorders sitting with ADHD as well. So ADHD sleep problems may be a side effect of impaired arousal, alertness, and regulation circuits in the brain. It's still not clear what causes ADHD, but as I've mentioned in previous Facebook Lives that I've done, scientists have investigated the role of neurotransmitters, and the role that they play in ADHD. And one of these neurotransmitters is serotonin. And some of you will know what serotonin is and others won't. But serotonin influences our moods, our social behavior, sleep, and memory. So low levels of serotonin in the ADHD brain may impair these certain functions, which usually worsen ADHD symptoms. Increasing serotonin in the brain appears to improve communication between brain cells, which in turn, of course, eases sleep. Serotonin levels, we know, can be improved by regular exercise, such as working out at the gym or just, walking every day, being out in nature, doing that exercise. Following a balanced diet, having regular massages also help produce serotonin in the body, and increasing light exposure through the day. So another fact that we also know is that the ADHD brain has a delay in melatonin onset for sleep. And I would say that this is definitely a fact. So for the average person, so for a neurotypical person, melatonin for most adults kicks in around about 9:30 p.m. at night. But we now know through research that in adults with ADHD, it happens more than an hour later. And they've found that in 75% of people with ADHD, the physiological sleep phase is delayed by 1.5 hours. We also know that core body temperatures associated with sleep are also delayed in people with ADHD. The delay in melatonin onset is also associated with late sleep onset and the time it takes for people with ADHD to fall asleep. So taking melatonin as an ADHD supplement can help both children and adults sleep safely and naturally at night, and can also assist in decreasing the amount of time it takes to fall asleep. Now, as I mentioned before, I have issues with sleeping, and I'm finding that one of the impediments at the moment for me is sticking to what I know works. And this is because distraction is a real issue for me with my ADHD. So I know that sticking to routine is very difficult for me. Now, I'm just going to go through some things to consider in relation to sleep. And I'm also going to talk a little bit more, in research that has been done around this. So the first thing to think is that if you take a stimulant medication, or if your child takes a stimulant medication, to try and give your child these medications as early as the day as possible, so that they're not interfering with you being able, or your child being able, to calm their mind at night before they go to sleep. Have a calming bedtime routine. So regular bedtime routine. So whatever that might look for you, and that routine has to stay the same on the weekend as it does during the week. Avoid consuming any form of caffeine, sugar, or alcohol at least 4 hours before bedtime. And try to avoid doing stimulating activities and projects that require hyper-focusing in the evening. Again, this is another problem with me. I am much more alert at night, and people with ADHD often show greater alertness in the evening. So therefore, they can become hyper-focused and start working on these projects and then lose track of time, which is another issue with ADHD, and therefore will find themselves going to bed later and much more difficult to calm their minds if they've become hyper-focused on an activity or on a task. So that thing of greater alertness in the evening is the opposite to what's found in the general population. So again, it's something that's particular to those with ADHD. Reducing screen time, which is an obvious one that we know, or blue light exposure within 2 hours of going to bed is critical. And also, as I mentioned before, getting enough exercise and sunlight during the day. So we know exercise plays a huge role in ADHD, and many of you that follow me will know that I'm always going on about this. This is because it really, really does beat in nature, and regular exercise is critical for people with ADHD. Also, 70% of people with ADHD have an oversensitivity to light, leading many, including myself, to wear sunglasses for long periods during the day. And then this can reinforce problems associated with the circadian shift at nighttime because of wearing the sunglasses and not having that exposure to light that we need for our body to register that it should be getting ready for sleep. A lot of people with ADHD, as I mentioned before, not only benefit from melatonin, but also benefit from bright light therapy in the morning, because it can help reset the circadian rhythms within the body. Making your bedroom and your bed a stress-free zone reserved for sleep only, so not doing any work, going on devices in your room, anything like that, that your bedroom is purely a stress-free zone for sleep. And as I mentioned before, going to bed at the same time every day, whether it's on the weekend or during the week, because chronic late sleep leads to chronic sleep debt. So so that's something that's really, really imperative to remember. But as I mentioned when I started the live just now, I do think that if yourself or your child has a diagnosis with ADHD, to look at those other associated sleep, well, they're not sleep issues, they're diagnosable conditions that we should be looking at. And they're the sleep disordered breathing, obstructive sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, circadian rhythm sleep disorders, insomnia, and narcolepsy, because they're now starting to realize the associations between these and ADHD. So thank you for all of those that are on now and that have watched today. So that I'm going to conclude the live for today now. But I hope that the information that I've shared on here is helpful to you. And as I said, if you watch later on, please put hashtag replay in the comments. And if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. And I will always come back and either private message you or answer you in the comments as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day.